The air in the emergency room at Metropolitan General was a toxic cocktail. It tasted of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of fear. Machines beeped a frantic, unheeded rhythm, a soundtrack to organized chaos. It was a place of constant motion, of gurneys rattling over linoleum, of clipped commands and hushed, desperate whispers. And in the center of this storm, Nurse Alara Vance tried her best to be invisible. She moved with a quiet hesitation that her colleagues mistook for incompetence. Her shoulders were perpetually slumped, as if carrying a weight no one else could see. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a severe, functional bun that did nothing to soften her features. She kept her eyes downcast, focusing on the scuffed toes of her practical shoes, on the endless lists on her clipboard, on anything but the judgmental eyes of her peers. They called her Ellie, a soft, gentle name for a soft, gentle woman. But it felt like a costume she wore, one that chafed against her skin. She was clumsy with simple things, fumbling with IV bags and tripping over power cords. Her hands, which could be so steady in other lifetimes, seemed to betray her here. They shook when drawing blood. They trembled when handing a scalpel. The other nurses either pitied her or scorned her. The junior ones, like Chloe, would offer a small, sympathetic smile when no one was looking. The senior ones, the sycophants who orbited the department's brilliant, tyrannical son, would mimic her fumbles behind her back. They saw a woman who was slow, fragile, and utterly out of her depth. They saw a mistake in hiring, a charity case who would wash out within the month. And then there was the son himself, Dr. Alistair Finch, chief of trauma surgery. He was a man carved from marble and ego, with a mind as sharp as the scalpels he wielded, and a heart as cold as the stainless steel of his operating table. His talent was undeniable. He could piece together shattered bodies with an artist's grace, performing surgical miracles that were spoken of in hushed, reverent tones throughout the hospital. But his genius was matched only by his cruelty. He moved through his domain like a predator, his piercing blue eyes scanning for any sign of weakness, any imperfection to exploit. He believed in a brutal form of excellence, one forged in the fires of humiliation. And his favorite target, his preferred kindling for that fire, was Alara. He seemed to have a sixth sense for her presence. He would appear just as she was struggling with a task, his voice cutting through the ER's din like a shard of glass. "Nurse Vance," he would say, his tone dripping with condescension, "is the simple act of preparing a saline drip beyond your capabilities this morning? Perhaps we should find you a task more suited to your talents. The bedpans in room 3 are reaching critical mass." The laughter that followed was always quiet, but it felt like a physical blow. Alara would just nod, her face flushing with shame, and murmur an apology. "Yes, doctor. Sorry, doctor." She never fought back. She never defended herself. She just absorbed the abuse, her silence fueling his contempt. Today was particularly bad. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had flooded the ER with a wave of broken bodies. The air was thick with the cries of the injured and the urgent shouts of the staff. It was the kind of high-pressure environment where Finch thrived, and where Alara seemed to shrink even further into herself. Finch was working in Trauma Bay 1, a whirlwind of controlled fury, barking orders as he stabilized a critically injured driver. Alara was tasked with assisting, which meant staying out of his way and anticipating his needs, a task at which he was failing spectacularly. "Suture!" he snapped, not looking up from the patient's mangled leg. Alara's hands fumbled with the sterile packet. The plastic was slippery, and her fingers felt like sausages. She finally tore it open, but the suture kit slipped, clattering onto the floor and skittering under the gurney. Finch stopped. The entire bay fell silent, the only sound the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator. He slowly straightened up, turning his head to fix her with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "Did you just drop my suture kit, Nurse Vance?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. I'm sorry, doctor. It slipped," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It slipped," he repeated, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Of course it did. Just like the blood pressure cuff slipped yesterday. Just like your grasp on basic medical procedure seems to slip on a daily basis." He took a step toward her, invading her personal space. The sycophantic nurses behind him watched with grim satisfaction. "I have a man bleeding out on my table. His life is measured in seconds, and you are playing fetch with my equipment." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper meant only for her. You are a liability. A pathetic, useless waste of a uniform. I don't know what sob story you told to get this job, but your welcome has officially worn out. Get out of my trauma bay. Go. Now. Tears pricked at Alara's eyes, hot and shameful. She didn't dare let them fall. She just nodded, turned, and fled the room, the sound of Finch's derisive chuckle following her down the hall. She hid in a supply closet, her back pressed against the cool metal shelves, and took a ragged breath. She clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. Under the long sleeve of her scrubs, a thick, jagged scar on her forearm seemed to burn with a life of its own. It was a relic from another world, a world where hesitation meant death, where her hands had never, ever trembled. She closed her eyes, forcing down the rage, the grief, the memories. She had chosen this quiet life. She had chosen this invisibility. This was the price she had to pay. The rest of the day was a blur of menial tasks. She restocked carts, cleaned rooms, and avoided eye contact. She was a ghost in the halls of the hospital, a non-entity. As the shift wore on, the chaos from the pileup began to subside. A semblance of routine returned. It was in this brief lull that the doors to the ambulance bay hissed open again. This arrival was different. There were no sirens, no frantic paramedics shouting vitals. A single, unmarked black van had pulled up, and two grim-faced men in dark suits carried a gurney inside. They moved with an unnerving efficiency, their eyes sweeping the room, assessing everything. On the gurney lay a man. He was unconscious, his face a mask of blood and dirt. He was listed as a John Doe, found in an alley downtown after a reported explosion. He wore the tattered clothes of a homeless man, but there was something about him that didn't fit. His body was a roadmap of well-defined muscle, and his hands, though bruised, were clean and calloused in the way of a soldier, not a vagrant. Dr. Finch, drawn by the unusual arrival, strode over. He glanced at the patient with undisguised disdain. Another one. What have we got? A paramedic, looking intimidated, read from his chart. Male, approximately 35. Multiple lacerations, probable concussion, signs of chemical burns on his torso. Vitals are unstable. Finch waved a dismissive hand. Chemical burns. He probably passed out on a bottle of drain cleaner. Get him cleaned up, run a tox screen for drugs and alcohol, and stick him in a corner until he sobers up. We have actual patients who need our attention. He viewed the man not as a patient, but as a nuisance, a piece of human debris cluttering his pristine ER. His diagnosis was born of prejudice, a snap judgment based on the man's appearance. He turned to leave, but Alara had drifted closer, her eyes fixed on the patient. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. It wasn't the visible injuries that alarmed her. It was the subtle things. The specific pallor of his skin, the almost imperceptible tremor in his limbs, the faint, almond-like scent clinging to his clothes. Her mind, the part of her she kept locked away, began to race, connecting dots that no one else could see. Dr. Finch, she said, her voice surprisingly clear. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation with him in weeks. He turned, an eyebrow raised in annoyance. What is it, Vance? Did you find a bedpan that needs emptying? She ignored the jibe, her gaze still locked on the John Doe. His pupils are pinpoint, and there's fasciculation in his thigh muscles. It's not alcohol poisoning. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. It looks like organophosphate exposure, a nerve agent. A heavy silence fell over the bay. The other staff members stared at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Who was this mousy nurse to question the great Dr. Finch? Finch's face darkened. He walked back to her, his expression thunderous. A nerve agent, he scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that so? And what clandestine adventures have you been on, Nurse Vance, to become an expert in chemical warfare? Did you read it in a spy novel? The symptoms are classic, she insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. The burns, the muscle tremors, the pinpoint pupils. If we don't administer an atropine autoinjector immediately, he'll go into respiratory failure. Finch laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. An autoinjector? You want me to waste valuable resources on a homeless drunk because of your paranoid fantasy? He needs a saline drip and a few hours to sleep it off. That's my diagnosis, and I am the doctor here." He pointed a finger at her face. "You are a nurse, a barely competent one at that. You will do as I say. Take him to Overflow Ward C, hook him up to a basic drip, and leave him. That is a direct order." Alara stared at him, then at the dying man on the gurney. She could see the clock ticking down. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to obey, to retreat back into her shell of invisibility. It was safer there. But then she looked at the man's face, at the slack jaw and pale skin. She saw other faces, other bodies, laid out in the sand and dust of a forgotten war zone. She heard the ghosts of old commands in her head. Leave no one behind. Something inside her snapped. The years of forced meekness, of swallowed insults, of hiding who she was, it all fractured in that one crystallizing moment. She looked Dr. Finch directly in the eye, and for the first time, he saw not a timid mouse, but something else, something hard and unyielding. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. Finch's jaw dropped. He was speechless. No one had ever said no to him. "What? What did you just say to me?" "I said no," Alara repeated, her voice steady now, devoid of any tremor. She turned to Chloe, the young nurse who had always shown her kindness. "Get me the emergency toxicology kit, the military-grade one from the hazardous materials locker, and bring me 3 milligrams of atropine and a vial of pralidoxime, now." Chloe stared, frozen. "But Dr. Finch said—" "Dr. Finch is wrong," Alara said, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. It was a voice of command, of absolute certainty. It was her real voice. "The man is dying. Are you going to help me save him, or are you going to stand there and watch?" Chloe, startled by this new, authoritative Alara, finally broke her paralysis and scurried off to the supply locker. Finch's face contorted with rage. "You are finished, Vance. You are firing yourself. Security!" he bellowed. "Get this insubordinate woman out of my hospital." But Alara wasn't listening. She was already at the patient's side, her movements suddenly fluid and precise. The clumsiness was gone, replaced by an economy of motion that was breathtaking to watch. Her hands were rock steady as she sliced open the man's shirt, revealing the strange chemical burns across his chest. In the center of the burns was a small, almost invisible puncture wound. "There's something in there," she murmured to herself. She grabbed a pair of forceps from a nearby tray. "Don't you dare touch him!" Finch roared, striding forward to grab her arm. What happened next was so fast, no one quite registered it. As Finch's hand reached for her, Alara moved. She didn't look up. She simply shifted her weight, brought her elbow back in a short, brutal arc, and drove it into his solar plexus. The air left Finch's lungs in a pained whoosh. He staggered backward, clutching his stomach, his face a mask of shock and agony. He crumpled to his knees, gasping for breath. The other staff members stared, their mouths agape. The mousy, incompetent nurse had just taken down the chief of trauma surgery with a single, brutally efficient move. Alara didn't even spare him a glance. Her focus was entirely on the patient. Chloe returned, her eyes wide, holding the requested supplies. Alara took them without a word. With the forceps, she probed the tiny wound. Her touch was impossibly delicate. She located a foreign object, grasped it, and slowly pulled. A small, metallic shard, no bigger than a grain of rice and trailing a thin wire, came free. "It's a microdart," she said, her voice grim, "designed to deliver the payload directly into the bloodstream." She dropped the dart into a biohazard bag. Then she grabbed the atropine injector. She didn't hesitate. She found the spot on his thigh, a practiced motion, and pressed the device firmly against his leg. Click. The life-saving medicine flooded his system. She worked with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing. She established a new IV line, administered the pralidoxime, and began shouting a string of complex medical orders to the stunned nurses. "I need a full decontamination shower setup, now. Notify toxicology we have a confirmed organophosphate exposure. I want vitals monitored every 2 minutes. And someone get him on a ventilator before his diaphragm seizes." The staff, now looking at her with a mixture of fear and awe, scrambled to obey. They had never seen anything like it. It was as if a completely different person was inhabiting Alara Vance's body. 2 security guards finally arrived, drawn by Finch's earlier shout. They saw their chief of surgery on his knees, gasping, and a nurse they barely recognized commanding the room like a seasoned general. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, bewildered. Finch, finally getting his breath back, pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "Her! She assaulted me, and she's performing unauthorized procedures. I fired her. Get her out of here." Alara didn't look at them. "This man is a critical patient," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "He is not to be moved, and I am not leaving his side. If you try to remove me, you will be obstructing medical care, and I will have you charged with accessory to negligent homicide." The guards hesitated, utterly confused. They looked at the furious doctor on the floor, then at the calm, commanding nurse, and the team of medical professionals now working frantically under her direction. They didn't know what to do. Finch staggered to his feet, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "I run this department. I am your boss. I order you to remove her," he shrieked, his professional demeanor completely gone. "She is a danger. She is insane." His tirade was cut short by a new sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that grew rapidly louder. Whoomp, 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 whoomp. It was a sound that didn't belong in the city. It was the sound of heavy rotor blades, close and getting closer. Everyone in the ER looked up toward the windows. The sound was deafening now, shaking the very foundations of the building. Outside, in the street right in front of the hospital entrance, 2 sleek black helicopters were descending. They had no markings, no insignia. They were military grade, and they were landing on a public street as if they owned it. Doors on the helicopters slid open before they even touched the ground. Figures clad in black tactical gear rappelled down, landing silently on the asphalt. There were a dozen of them, moving with a terrifying, synchronized grace. They formed a perimeter, their weapons held at a low ready, securing the area in seconds. The few civilians on the street froze, staring in disbelief. Then, from the lead helicopter, a man descended. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a decorated military uniform that identified him as a high-ranking general. He strode toward the hospital entrance, his boots clicking on the pavement, his expression grim and determined. His team fell in behind him, moving like a wave of black armor. The glass doors of the ER slid open, and the general entered, flanked by 2 of his soldiers. The emergency room, which had been a hive of activity, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Every doctor, every nurse, every patient stared at the armed soldiers who now stood in their midst. The general's eyes swept the room, cold and assessing. They weren't looking for a terrorist. They weren't looking for a bomb. They were looking for something else. His gaze passed over the shocked faces, over the cowering form of Dr. Finch, and then it landed on Alara. A flicker of recognition, of profound relief, crossed his face. His stern demeanor softened almost imperceptibly. He walked directly toward Trauma Bay 1, his soldiers clearing a path. He stopped just a few feet from her. "We heard a call was intercepted," the general said, his voice a low, powerful rumble that commanded attention. "We heard the Angel was compromised." Alara finally looked up from her patient. Her face was pale, her expression exhausted but resolute. She looked at the general, and a universe of shared history passed between them in a single glance. "His call wasn't intercepted, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "He never got to make it. They got to him first." She gestured to the unconscious man on the gurney. "This is Captain Alex Ryder, Tier 1 operator. He was on a deep cover mission to track the sale of a new generation nerve agent, VX3. A collective gasp went through the room. Dr. Finch stared, his face ashen. General Marcus Thorne nodded grimly. "We lost contact with him 12 hours ago. We've been tearing the city apart looking for him." His eyes fell on the patient, on the IV lines and the ventilator tube Alara had expertly put in place. He saw the used atropine injector in the tray. He looked back at Alara, his eyes filled with a deep paternal pride. "You saved his life." "Barely," she said. "Another 10 minutes and he would have been gone." Finch, seeing his entire world collapsing, found his voice. "This is absurd. This woman is a nurse. She assaulted me. She's been fired. I demand you." General Thorne turned his head slowly, fixing Finch with a stare so cold it could freeze fire. "You are Dr. Alistair Finch?" "Yes, I am the chief of surgery here, and "You are the man who diagnosed Captain Ryder with alcohol poisoning," the general interrupted, his voice flat and dangerous. "You are the man who ordered him left in a hallway to die. You are the man who tried to stop the only person in this building qualified to treat him." Finch's bravado crumbled. I didn't know. He looked like a man who needed help," Thorne snarled. "And you failed him. You failed your oath." He turned to one of his soldiers. "Secure this man. He is now under military jurisdiction for criminal negligence endangering a national security asset." Two soldiers moved forward, grabbing Finch by the arms. "You can't do this!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. "This is my hospital. I have rights." "Your rights ended when you left my soldier to die," Thorne said coldly, turning his back on him. The soldiers dragged the screaming, protesting doctor away. Thorne then addressed the entire room, his voice booming with authority.
"This facility is now under temporary military control. My team will secure the perimeter. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. This woman," he said, pointing to Alara, "is Commander Alara Vance, retired Special Operations Combat Medic. She is the most decorated field surgeon in the history of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Her authority in all medical matters concerning Captain Ryder is absolute. You will give her anything she requires, without question and without delay. Is that understood?" A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the staff. They stared at Alara, at the quiet, clumsy nurse they had mocked and dismissed, and tried to reconcile that image with the decorated war hero standing before them. Chloe's eyes were wide with wonder. The other nurses who had laughed at her now looked at the floor in shame. Alara paid them no mind. Her focus was back on her patient. "General, we have a problem," she said, her tone all business. "I stabilized him, but the agent is still in his system. And the dart I removed? It's not just a delivery system. It's a tracker." Thorne's face hardened. "They know he's here." "They know someone is treating him," she corrected, "which means they know their primary weapon failed. They'll send a cleanup crew. This hospital is a soft target. We need to move him. Now." "My thoughts exactly," Thorne agreed. "We have a secure medical facility upstate. The helicopter is prepped for evac." "No," Alara said firmly. "Too public. If they're watching, they'll see us leave. And we don't know who in this hospital might be compromised. Dr. Finch didn't just misdiagnose Captain Ryder. He tried to kill him. That wasn't just arrogance. That was malice. Someone got to him." The implication hung heavy in the air. Finch wasn't just a bad doctor. He was a traitor. Suddenly, a code blue alarm blared through the ER. A nurse rushed up to them, her face pale with panic. "It's Dr. Finch! The soldiers had him in a holding room! He's dead! He was poisoned!" Alara and Thorne exchanged a dark look. "They have someone on the inside," Alara said grimly. "They silenced him before he could talk. We're not safe here. Not for another minute." She looked at her patient, whose vitals were beginning to fluctuate again. "We can't risk a standard evac. We need to disappear." "What do you have in mind, Commander?" Thorne asked, deferring completely to her judgment. Alara's eyes scanned the room, her mind working with tactical precision. She was no longer Nurse Ellie. She was Commander Vance, a warrior in her element. "The laundry chute," she said. "It leads to the sub-basement. From there we can access the old service tunnels. They run for miles under the city. We'll take him out that way. We'll need a portable life support unit, a transport gurney, and a decoy." "A decoy?" "Load a covered gurney onto one of the helicopters. Make a big show of it," she explained. "Draw their eyes to the sky. While they're watching the birds fly, we'll be moving underground like rats." Thorne grinned, a flash of respect in his eyes. "Brilliant. My team is at your disposal." What followed was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Under Alara's direction, Thorne's soldiers and the now obedient hospital staff worked as a single unit. A portable life support system was procured and attached to Captain Ryder's gurney. A decoy, a gurney covered with a sheet to look like a body, was ostentatiously wheeled out to the waiting helicopter. The rotor spun up, and the aircraft lifted off, banking hard to the north. Meanwhile, in the quiet chaos of the ER,
Alara, Thorn, and a small team of 4 elite soldiers wheeled Captain Ryder toward a service corridor. They found the laundry chute, a wide metal tube descending into darkness. "We'll have to rappel down with him," one of the soldiers said. "No time," Alara countered, "and it's too risky for his vitals. We're riding it down." She looked at the soldiers. "Strap him to the gurney, then strap yourselves to it. I'll go first to guide it." Before anyone could argue, she had secured a rope and was lowering herself into the dark, cavernous chute. She braced her feet against the sides, ready to control the descent of the gurney. It was a crazy, reckless plan, but it was fast, and right now, speed was life. The gurney was lowered into the chute, the soldiers clinging to its sides, their faces grim. The descent was a jarring, clattering ride through darkness, the smell of bleach and old linen filling the air. They landed with a hard thud in a massive bin of dirty laundry in the sub-basement. They scrambled out, Alara immediately checking Ryder's vitals. He was stable. "This way," she commanded, leading them toward a rusted metal door marked with a faded danger sign. One of the soldiers produced a breaching tool and popped the lock with a single, sharp crack. The air that hit them was cold and damp, smelling of earth and decay. They were in the service tunnels, a labyrinth of brick and concrete that snaked beneath the city. They moved quickly and silently, the only sounds the whir of the life support unit and the drip of water from the ceiling above. They had been moving for nearly an hour when the soldier at the rear held up a fist. "Contact," he whispered. Far behind them, down the long, dark tunnel, were the faint beams of flashlights. They had been followed.
"They must have had someone watching the service exits," Thorn growled. "How many?"
"At least 6, maybe more," the soldier replied. "We can't outrun them with the gurney," Alara said, her mind racing. "And we can't risk a firefight down here. The ricochets could hit his life support." She looked around, her eyes piercing the gloom. She spotted a small alcove, a maintenance junction filled with pipes and conduits. "In here. Now." They pushed the gurney into the tight space, pressing themselves against the damp brick walls. They switched off all their lights, plunging the tunnel into absolute blackness. Alara placed a hand on Ryder's chest, monitoring his breathing by feel alone. The air grew thick with tension as they waited, listening to the approaching footsteps. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by harsh, whispered voices in a language Alara recognized as Russian. They were professionals, mercenaries. The beams of their flashlights danced across the tunnel walls, getting closer and closer. One of the beams swept across the opening of their alcove. Alara held her breath. The light lingered for a heartbeat, then moved on. The footsteps continued past them, receding down the tunnel. They had missed them. They waited in the suffocating darkness for a full 10 minutes after the footsteps faded. Finally, Thorn gave a quiet signal. "Clear." They moved out of the alcove and continued in the opposite direction, their pace urgent. They needed to get off the grid. "I have a place," Alara said quietly. "An old safe house. It's not in any official records. It's completely isolated. North of the city, in the mountains." Thorn looked at her. "How?" "It was my father's," she said, a flicker of old pain in her eyes. "A hunting cabin. After he died, I retrofitted it, just in case. Just in case the quiet life she had tried to build for herself ever came crashing down. Just in case her old world ever came looking for her." It took them another 2 hours to navigate the tunnels to an exit point beneath an abandoned warehouse on the city's industrial outskirts. A black transport van, summoned by Thorn on a satellite phone, was waiting for them. They loaded Captain Ryder into the back and began the long, tense drive north, away from the city lights and into the dark wilderness of the mountains. The cabin was exactly as she described it, isolated. A small, rustic structure of wood and stone, nestled deep within a thick pine forest, accessible only by a single, unmarked dirt road. To the naked eye, it was a simple hunting lodge, but beneath the surface, it was a fortress. Alara had installed reinforced steel doors and bulletproof windows. The stone fireplace hid a weapons locker. The floorboards in the bedroom lifted to reveal a fully stocked medical bay, complete with a surgical table and advanced monitoring equipment. It was a ghost's refuge, a place to disappear. They moved Captain Ryder into the makeshift infirmary. Alara immediately hooked him up to the more advanced monitors. His condition was still critical. The nerve agent was insidious, attacking his system on a cellular level. "I need to perform a blood filtration," she announced. "It's the only way to get the rest of the toxin out before it causes permanent neurological damage." She began preparing for the complex procedure, her movements sure and steady. The war hero was in her element, the timid nurse a distant memory. Thorn watched her, his expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I'm sorry, Alara," he said quietly. "I'm sorry we pulled you back into this." "You didn't," she replied, not looking up from her work. "It came and found me. It always does." She paused, her hands hovering over a tray of sterile instruments. "Who are they, Marcus? The men who did this to him?" "A splinter cell of the SVR," Thorn said grimly, "led by a man named Dmitry Volkov. A ghost. We thought he was dead. Ryder was tracking a sale between Volkov's group and a cartel. The VX-3 was the merchandise. Ryder got too close, so they took him out." "And they paid Finch to make sure he stayed dead," Alara concluded. "It would seem so," Thorn said. "Volkov doesn't leave loose ends." As if on cue, one of the soldiers monitoring the perimeter feeds from hidden cameras spoke up, his voice tense. "General, we have movement. 2 vehicles approaching on the access road. No headlights." Alara and Thorn looked at each other. They had been found. "How?" Thorn demanded. "This location is off every grid." "The dart," Alara said, her heart sinking. "I took it out of him, but maybe it had a secondary beacon, or maybe they have another way of tracking him." Her eyes fell on the captain's arm. A small, intricate tattoo was visible just below his wrist. It looked like a simple geometric design, but her trained eye saw more. "It's not a tattoo. It's subcutaneous circuitry, a biometric tracker. They're tracking his life signs." "Can you disable it?" "I'd have to cut it out, and I can't do that while I'm trying to keep him alive. We have to fight." "We're outnumbered," the soldier said. "Thermal shows at least 15 hostiles disembarking. They're forming a perimeter around the cabin." "Then we make our stand here," Thorn said, his hand going to the sidearm on his hip. He was a general, but he was a soldier first. "No," Alara said. She walked over to the stone fireplace and pulled a loose stone from the mantel. A hidden keypad was revealed. She typed in a code. A section of the floor slid open, revealing a steel locker. She opened it. It was filled with military-grade weaponry, assault rifles, sidearms, grenades, and body armor. She pulled out a rifle, checking the action with a practiced efficiency that made the Special Forces soldiers stare. She tossed a rifle to Thorn. "They think they've cornered us in a wooden box," she said, her voice hard as steel. "They don't know they've walked into a kill zone." She pulled on a tactical vest, her movements swift and sure. "You and your men hold the main room," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Fortify the windows, create fatal funnels at the doorways. I'm going outside." "Outside?" Thorn exclaimed. "That's suicide." "They'll expect us to bunker down," she explained, loading a magazine into her rifle. "They'll surround us and lay siege. But they won't expect a counterattack. Not from the medic." She gave him a grim smile. "They've come to hunt the angel. Well, the angel is about to hunt back." She moved to a back room and disappeared into a closet. A moment later, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. It was an escape route she had built years ago. It emerged in a dense thicket of trees 100 yards from the cabin. The night was cold and silent, the only sound the wind whispering through the pines. Alara moved through the forest like a phantom, her feet making no sound on the bed of pine needles. She was clad in dark clothing, her face smeared with mud for camouflage. She was no longer a doctor or a nurse. She was a predator. She circled around behind the mercenaries' position. They were moving into place, taking cover behind trees, their weapons trained on the cabin. They were professional, but they were also arrogant. They thought their prey was trapped. They had no idea one of them was already in their midst. Alara raised her rifle, the night vision scope turning the world a ghostly green. She lined up her first target, a man coordinating the assault via a radio. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate. In, out. The world narrowed to the man in her sights. She squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made only a soft cough. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound. Before the others could react, she had acquired her next target. Cough. Another man fell. The mercenaries scrambled, confusion turning to panic. They were being picked off from the darkness, from a direction they hadn't anticipated. They started firing wildly into the trees, their muzzle flashes giving away their positions. It was a fatal mistake. Alara moved from tree to tree, a ghost in the night, firing with deadly precision. She was a force of nature, a righteous fury unleashed. She was defending her patient, her sanctuary, her very right to exist. Inside the cabin, Thorn and his men heard the muffled shots and the rising panic of the enemy. They opened fire from the windows, their coordinated volleys cutting down the mercenaries caught in the crossfire. The firefight was brutal and short. Caught between the fortified cabin and the phantom in the woods, the enemy force was decimated. In less than 10 minutes, it was over. The forest fell silent again, the air thick with the smell of cordite. Alara emerged from the trees, her rifle held at a low ready. She did a quick sweep of the perimeter, confirming all threats were neutralized. Then she went back inside. Thorn looked at her, his face a mask of awe. "I'd forgotten," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I'd forgotten who you really are." "I tried to forget too," she said softly, her warrior persona receding, the weariness returning to her eyes. She put down the rifle and immediately went to her patient's side. The battle was over, but his fight for life was not. She worked through the night, a surgeon in a war zone. She performed the complex blood filtration, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She sutured his wounds. She monitored his vitals, making minute adjustments to his medications, fighting the poison that still lingered in his system. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the bullet-riddled windows, his fever finally broke. His vitals stabilized. For the first time, he was out of immediate danger. Alara slumped into a chair, utterly exhausted, but victorious. She had saved him. Twice. A few hours later, he began to stir. His eyes fluttered open. They were a startlingly clear blue, and they were filled with confusion. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw from the ventilator. Alara was at his side instantly, offering him a small cup of water. "Easy," she said, her voice gentle again. "You're safe." He looked at her, then around the rustic cabin, at the heavily armed soldiers, at the general sitting in the corner. "Where?" he rasped. "We're off the grid, Captain Ryder," she said. "My name is Alara. You've been through a lot." He stared at her, a flicker of memory in his eyes. "The hospital," he whispered. "I remember. A voice. Your voice. You saved me." "I had some help," she said, nodding toward Thorn and his men. Over the next 2 days, as Captain Alex Ryder recovered, the full story came out. The data he had collected on Volkov's operation was stored on a biodrive keyed to his DNA, hidden within the subcutaneous tracker. It contained proof of Volkov's network, including the names of high-level government officials in his pocket. It was an intelligence goldmine. Reinforcements arrived, and the cabin was turned into a temporary command post. The data was retrieved, and a massive operation was launched. Volkov's network was shattered. His buyers were arrested. The corrupt officials were exposed. It was a staggering victory, and it was all because one quiet nurse had refused to follow a bad order. When the dust settled, they returned to the city. The story of what happened at Metropolitan General had been contained, officially labeled a gas leak and a security drill. But the truth was spreading like wildfire through the hospital grapevine. Alara walked back into the ER a week later to collect her things. The moment she stepped through the doors, the entire room fell silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look at her. But this time, the stares weren't filled with pity or scorn. They were filled with awe and respect. Chloe rushed up to her, her eyes shining. We heard you're a hero." Alara gave a small, tired smile. "I was just doing my job." The hospital administrator, a man who had once ignored Finch's abuse, came scurrying out of his office. "Commander Vance, please, your termination was a clerical error, a terrible mistake. We would be honored to have you back. Any position you want. Chief of nursing, head of trauma, it's yours." Alara just looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word. She walked to her old locker, the one in the corner where she used to hide, and cleaned it out. As she was leaving, she saw the nurses who had once mocked her. They stood in a small, miserable group, unable to meet her eye. One of them, a senior nurse named Brenda, stepped forward. We're sorry, Alara," she stammered. "The way we treated you, we were wrong." Alara paused and looked at them. She saw not malice, but fear. Fear of Finch, fear of losing their jobs. She nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, if not forgiveness, and walked out the doors for the last time. General Thorne and a fully recovered Captain Ryder were waiting for her outside. Alex was in uniform now, his bearing strong and confident. He walked with a slight limp, but his blue eyes were clear and full of gratitude. "Leaving so soon?" Thorne asked, a smile on his face. "Nothing left for me here," she said. "Good," Thorne said, "because I have a proposition for you. The President has just signed off on a new unit, a rapid response medical tactical team. It'll operate under Special Operations Command. It needs a leader, someone with a unique skill set, someone who can perform surgery in a firefight and command a room with equal authority. The job is yours, if you want it, Commander." Alara looked at him, then at Alex, who was smiling at her. For years, she had been running from her past, hiding from who she was. She had tried to be small, to be invisible, but the world wouldn't let her. And maybe, she realized, she didn't want it to anymore. The scar on her arm no longer felt like a brand of shame, but a badge of survival. "I'll need my own team," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was the first real smile anyone had seen from her in years. "And I'll need a good second in command." She looked pointedly at Alex. He grinned back. "I think I know a guy who's looking for a new assignment, ma'am." Alara looked up at the sky. The future was no longer a quiet gray expanse she had to endure. It was an open horizon, filled with purpose. She had walked into that hospital a ghost, a timid nurse hiding from the world. She walked away a commander, a hero, and most importantly, herself. She had found her way back from the shadows, not by hiding from the fire, but by walking right back into it. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Commander Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. We should never underestimate someone based on their outward appearance or quiet demeanor. True strength and incredible skill can be hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. It also shows that doing the right thing, even when it's hard and goes against authority, is always the correct choice. Alara's courage to defy a corrupt doctor saved a life and ultimately exposed a dangerous conspiracy. This reminds us that one person's integrity can make a world of difference. True strength is not about status or a loud voice. It is about character, courage, and the will to act when it matters most. What would you have done if you were in Alara's situation? Would you have followed the doctor's orders to protect your job? Or would you have risked it all to save a patient's life? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us create more content like this. Have a nice rest of your day.